If you're a Java developer, you know the drill. You've probably spent more hours than you'd like to admit writing the same database code over and over again. Well, today, we're going to look at Spring Data JPA, a tool that's designed to just get rid of all that extra work so you can focus on the stuff that really matters.
I mean, seriously, how many times have you written the code to open a connection, run a simple query, map all the results back to an object, and then, close everything without any leaks? It's a classic developer headache. And it's not just tedious, it's also a place where a lot of bugs can creep in. So that brings us to our first section here, the database code headache. Because, to really get why the solution is so good, we first need to agree on just how annoying the problem is. For years, this was just the reality of the job for a lot of us. You were writing SQL statements by hand for every little thing. You were building these repetitive data access objects, or DAOs. You had to deal with all the boilerplate code for managing connections, and then you had to manually map every single column from a result set to a field in your object. It was a huge time sink and, honestly, a major source of bugs. And you just know when you're doing something not repetitive. You start to think, there has to be a better way, right? That feeling is really what pushes software development forward. This idea that stuff like this can and absolutely should be automated. And that better way? It's Spring Data JPA. And this isn't just a small improvement. It's a totally different way of thinking about how you talk to a database, one that pretty much gets rid of that headache we were just talking about. So what is this thing exactly? Well, think of Spring Data JPA as this really smart layer that sits on top of existing tools you might already use, like Hibernate. It handles all the nitty-gritty implementation details for you, so you get a super simple, really consistent way to get to your data. And its whole reason for being is just to eliminate boilerplate code. And we're not talking about just a little bit of code reduction. We're talking about getting rid of entire classes and methods that you used to have to write completely by hand. So how does it actually do this? It can honestly feel like magic, but it's really just some very clever engineering. So let's pull back the curtain a little bit and see how this magic actually works.
Believe it or not, pretty much all the power that we're about to talk about gets unlocked from one single, incredibly simple line of Java code.
And here it is. This is the key. You don't write a class, you just define an interface. By having it extend JpaRepository, you're telling Spring two things. First, the entity you want to work with, in this case it's student, and second, the data type of its primary key, which is a long. That's it. From just that one line, Spring dynamically creates a fully working implementation for you when the application starts. That's the core of the magic right there. So the whole process is unbelievably simple. First, you define your own interface, like student repository. Second, you make it extend JpaRepository, and you tell it your entity and its ID type. And third, well, there is no third step. That's it. Spring just goes and creates a fully implemented bean for you with all the methods you'd expect. Save, findById, delete, find all of it. Okay, so the basic create, read, update, delete stuff is covered. That's cool, but what about custom queries? What if you need to find a student by their name, or maybe find all the students in a specific course? If we aren't writing the code, how in the world do we write the queries? The answer is another piece of this magic called derived query methods. And this feature is just incredibly powerful. Spring will literally parse the names of the methods that you declare in your repository interface, and from the name alone, it'll figure out what database query you want and write it for you. Let's look at a few examples, because this is where it gets really cool. If you declare a method in your interface called findByName, Spring just knows you want a query based on the name field. findById is a classic one. But check this out. It gets even more powerful. A method like findByCourseAndGrade, Spring understands that. It will automatically translate that into a SQL query with a where clause that checks for both the course and the grade. You didn't have to write a single line of SQL. So, what's the ultimate payoff here? What do you really get for adopting this way of doing things? Well, that brings us to our final section, more power, less code. This is basically the mantra for Spring Data JPA. By writing less code yourself, you are actually gaining more power and more capability. You're letting a highly optimized, well-tested framework do all the heavy lifting for you. And the benefits in the real world are huge. I mean, less code literally means fewer places for bugs to hide. It means you can develop features way faster because you're not getting stuck in the mud writing the same repetitive database logic again and again. You're shipping features, not messing around with JDBC connections. And this brings us to what might be the most important point of all. Your real job as a developer is to solve business problems, right? It's not to be an expert at writing perfect SQL. Spring Data JPA frees you from all that low-level plumbing so you can put your brainpower where it adds the most value, on your actual application logic.
All right, let's wrap this all up. If you're going to remember just a few things from this explainer, these are the ones.
First, Spring Data JPA just gets rid of that boring boilerplate by generating the data access code for you. Second, the whole thing starts with that simple repository interface extending JpaRepository. Third, it can even write your custom queries for you just based on method names. And finally, the big one. This whole approach lets you focus on what actually matters, building cool stuff for your users.
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. When you're no longer buried under a mountain of data access boilerplate, what new features are you going to build? What bigger problems are you going to solve with all that extra time and mental energy? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.